Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Alejandro Campos-Garcia. I will be the host for this event today. Welcome, Philip. Before we start, it's very important to acknowledge that Royal Roads is located in the traditional lands of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and the Songhees. In these lands that they have lived for time immemorial, we have the fortune of work, learn, and honor the multiplicity and intersected identities we all have. First of all, happy Pride Month. So today, basically, we are excited to kick off our University Pride celebration. Before we begin this event, I want to share some announcements about Royal Roads initiatives to celebrate Pride. All members of the Royal Roads community are invited to join us for our on-campus Pride Social on July 3rd from 11:45 to 1:30 p.m. in the Sherman Yen building. There will be refreshments, live entertainment, and interactive tables hosted by Royal Roads Proud and the Diversity Action Group. Additionally, in July 6, Royal Roads will participate in the annual Victoria Pride Parade. We warmly welcome all students, staff, faculty, family, and friends to join our parade contingent. If you want to participate in the parade, there is we're collecting names in that table. So please add your name so the Royal Roads Proud can contact you and give you the information you need to be part of the parade, of the contingent. In the library, you will find a display featuring books, films, and essays that explore and celebrate the experiences of 2S LGBTQIA+ individuals. These resources showcase their influence on popular media, education, and leadership, while highlighting the history and rights of the community. For more activities and resources, please visit our website and check out the Pride Parade, the Pride Parade page, and Pride page in general. Today, we are inaugurating this celebration with a very special guest from our community. I don't think he needs introduction, but in case you are new in our community, I would like to say some words. Philip is a leader with broad experience in the public service and the post-secondary sector. He has held senior leadership positions in multiple provincial ministries. From 1997 to 2011, Philip held the office of Deputy Minister, serving in a wide range of portfolios in British Columbia and Ontario. In the post-secondary sector, Philip has served as a Vice President of External Relationships at the University of British Columbia and Simon Fraser University. More relevant to us, Dr. Philip Steenkamp has been the President and Vice Chancellor of Royal Roads University since 2018. Among his multiple recognitions, in 2024, he received the King Charles III Coronation Medal, recognizing those who have made significant contributions to Canada and their home provinces. Today, we will have a unique opportunity to learn from Philip what is the meaning of leading with pride. So please join me to welcome Philip Steenkamp. So, hello, Philip. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation to be the keynote speaker for our Pride celebration and for the insights you will offer based on your lived experience. Before you and I start our dialogue, I would like to share a video you recorded in 2021.
Hello, everyone. I've been asking myself the question, do we still need gay pride? I am gay. 3 short words, 6 letters. Difficult to say for most of us, deeply agonizing for many, impossible for some, dangerous for others. I grew up, like so many people my age, in a society where homosexuality was regarded as deviant, abnormal, immoral. In fact, it was illegal. To borrow Trevor Noah's phrase, I was born a crime. And so I hid. I hid from myself, from my family, from my community. To avoid discovery, I had to watch the way I stood, the way I walked, the way I talked, what I thought, what I was interested in, what I did. School was especially brutal. Boys deemed to be gay were mocked, bullied, and beaten up. I hid. I felt guilty about not standing up for those boys, but secretly, I was glad it was not me. I hid for a long time. I realize now that I lived in fear that my real identity would be discovered and that my world would end. It took me a lot of courage to eventually come out at the age of 38. Since then, I've been on a remarkable journey of self-discovery with my partner Brad, our daughter Hannah, and other family and friends. I'm hugely grateful for the acceptance and support I've had in this community, and so thankful that I live in Canada at this time. I know for many this is not the case. They face daily discrimination, persecution, and worse. A 20-year-old Iranian man, Alireza Fazeli Monfared, was reportedly killed on May 4, 2021 by his half-brother and cousins because he was gay. They slit his throat and dumped his body under a tree near Azva, the capital of the southwestern province of Khuzestan. That's why we still need pride. Jada Peterson, a 29-year-old black trans woman, was murdered in Charlotte, North Carolina on April 4, 2021. Already in 2021, at least 29 transgender or gender non-conforming people have been killed in the US. That's why we still need pride. Over 100 municipalities in Poland, encompassing about a third of the country, have adopted resolutions declaring themselves LGBT-free zones. That's why we still need pride. David Kato Kasuli, a Ugandan teacher and LGBTQ+ rights activist, considered a father of Uganda's gay rights movement and described as Uganda's first openly gay man, was murdered at his home in 2011. This was shortly after winning a lawsuit against a magazine which had published his name and photograph identifying him as gay and calling for him to be executed. That's why we still need pride. Sarah Hagazi, a prominent LGBTQ+ activist who sought asylum in Canada after being arrested and tortured in her native Egypt, died in Toronto June 13, 2020, of an apparent suicide. In Canada, LGBTQ+ youth are at far greater risk for depression, suicide, and substance use. On an annual basis, 29% of LGBTQ+ youth attempt suicide at least once, compared to 6% of heterosexual youth. That's why we still need pride. There are 69 countries in the world where homosexuality is still illegal, and 13 where it is legally punishable by death. That's why we still need pride. And so to those of you out there, especially young people, coming to terms with your sexual orientation or gender identity, know this: there is a community that will support you, care for you, and love you. Happy Pride, everyone.
This video is relevant not only to our conversation today, but is also very relevant to the tumultuous times we are currently facing. It's more relevant than ever. And in 2021, we were living a time of hope. Now we're living a time of some can call despair. So I would like to start this conversation, Philip, by asking you a personal question. What has it meant to lead as an openly gay university president?
Thank you, Alejandro, and thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation today. Yes, I mean, I just go back to that video some years ago now and think, maybe then, and, maybe I was naive, but, there were certain assumptions that progress was linear on these issues. And clearly the last few years has showed us that it's not linear, right? We've seen some major setbacks, and I know we'll talk about that in a moment. So I think it's extremely important as a leader to be authentic. You can't, we've seen some examples of this recently. You can't always be auditioning for approval in whatever room you find yourself in. You have to believe in something, and you have to stand up for something. And it's great when things seem to be moving in the right direction. It's easier, but it's especially important when you see setbacks like we've seen recently. and challenges like we've seen recently. So for me, I think there's an added importance in being authentic and in standing up right now, because that kind of role modeling is hugely important. I mean, people are facing incredible kind of persecution and harassment and discrimination, all over the world on these issues. And so for me, I think there's almost a sense of an added responsibility right now. But it comes with all kinds of challenges, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a moment.
Thank you for that. Have you ever felt pressure to downplay your identity as a university leader, especially in moments of political or institutional tension?
It's an interesting question. As a university leader, no, I would say, because it's, in general, in Canada, it's a pretty accepting environment in the post-secondary system. One of the things I did when I started as president here in 2019 with my colleagues across the country, there's an organization called Universities Canada, which represents the 98 universities across the country. And I established an affinity group for LGBTQ2S plus university presidents. And there are 10 of us now out of 98, which is pretty good, 10 out presidents in any event. And we always, prior to our twice yearly meetings, we get together for a meal or we get together for a drink. It's not overly formal, but it's a great opportunity for us, to just get together, to talk, to compare notes. I will say that there are presidents from smaller towns in certain provinces who have faced significant challenges and have faced harassment and have faced threats. Even now, it's happening, right? I haven't personally. In my previous occupations, I remember when I was deputy minister here in British Columbia, deputy minister in the Premier's office, and I was responsible for social policy. And it was a time there was a right-of-centre government. Prior to my appointment, the Premier had to meet with the caucus because there were concerns raised about putting a gay man in charge of social policy in this province. Now, as it turned out, they got through that discussion and I was welcomed into that position. But for the first time since I'd been a deputy minister, I suddenly thought, this is still an issue, right? And there had to be a discussion about it and a decision made and all of that kind of thing. And that wasn't that long ago, So in other contexts, there are some challenges for me being a university president, being an openly gay out university president, when I think about travel and international partnerships. And you saw in that video, I think I said 69 countries where homosexuality was criminalized. It's 64 now. So there's been some progress, but there is actually legislation in a few to criminalize homosexuality. So it seems to be going back the other way. And 12 countries where it is still punishable by death. So you do have to be mindful of that. And you do, in a way, have to, I wouldn't say you have to hide, but you have to be much more discreet than you can be here, as an example. So I would say that in those ways. I mean, if we were in other provinces, in some of the states in the United States right now, I think it would be a much bigger factor. Yeah.
Oh my. So your video from 2021 is a powerful reminder that pride is not just a celebration, but resistance and remembrance. What is at risk when leaders stop showing up visibly and vocally in support of inclusion? Because that is happening now.
Yeah, it's happening. It's happening now, and it's been fascinating to watch, in particular, our colleagues in the United States, to see which leaders have stood up and which ones have hidden or have tried to appease the Trump administration on a whole variety of fronts. And there's no appeasing these people, right? There's no end to the appeasement or the debasement, and if you debase yourselves and you disavow your values, it ends badly. And we've seen a couple of recent cases of that. So I think it's critically important that people stand up. I said at the beginning, you have to believe in something. You can't be auditioning for approval in whatever room you find yourself in. You have to have values, and you have to be prepared to stand up for them and articulate them. And what's so interesting about the Pride movement right now, you've probably been reading about the withdrawal of sort of major donors from Pride. Major corporations have been withdrawing their support for Pride. It's happened in Vancouver, it's happened in Toronto, it's happened in Montreal, but it's happened all across the US especially, huge withdrawals. And, it's something I call kind of rainbow capitalism, right? While things are going in that direction and you can make money out of that market, we've seen big corporations step up, but clearly they've turned out to be very fair weather friends, because very few are prepared now to stand up, given that the direction has changed, the direction of the wind has changed. But I think there's something quite powerful there about the community looking at Pride now and returning Pride to its more activist roots as well. So maybe the end of this era of rainbow capitalism isn't a bad thing, because it will force people really to think about what Pride was, what started with Pride, and what it's about and why it's important. So there's a kind of there's an opportunity to kind of reorient and think about what power there is in community, right?
I have a question related to the university, because we have seen a lot now, at least in BC, this tendency to embrace neutrality. Yeah. And certain things that were not considered political now have been labeled as political. And Pride could be one of those kind of celebrations that can be deemed, identified as political. And the university overstretching and going beyond what they're expecting to do, that is being neutral regarding knowledge and regarding kind of positions. How do you think this topic of neutrality can play a role in the incoming future for the post-secondary sector, knowing that you have a really good insight about what is happening in universities in Canada? You are very well informed what is happening there and what is the conversation that exists, and how some presidents are really pushing towards that direction. How do you think the topic of neutrality can impact our own celebration of Pride and our celebration of our duty to protect and to honor identity in that particular way?
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. We've seen, as you point out, Alejandro, we've seen sort of more and more adoption of the institutional neutrality stance, and I'm hearing it among my colleagues here in British Columbia as well. And I think we need to make a distinction between political neutrality and institutional neutrality. I think there are some fundamental human values that we should be prepared to stand up for at any time and be prepared to see represented and celebrated on our campuses. And Pride would be one of those. But, Black History Month would be another. We are flying the Indigenous flag right now, as you know, through the month of June. And we make land acknowledgements. All these things are being challenged, and they're being called political. And I just think we need to take, and I've been doing that with my colleagues, take a stand right now on that stuff. I do think universities have, and part of the challenge we're seeing right now, have not been welcoming places for all voices over the last few years. And I think explicitly for conservative voices, right? Conservative voices have felt excluded from many university environments. And I think we've got a real responsibility as well to support intellectual diversity and viewpoint diversity and encourage voices from across the political spectrum. But I do think there's a set of core values that, in my view, should not be seen as partisan values. They are right now. I mean, and they have for a long time. And you've seen what's happened in the United States and now in some Canadian provinces where, there's been significant rollbacks. I mean, there's a group at UBC which have a court case right now challenging the university's commitments to things like land acknowledgements, claiming that those are exclusionary, And I think that stuff needs to be vigorously challenged. But on the other hand, I do think we need to really think about, do we provide an environment where all voices feel welcome? And do we truly encourage viewpoint diversity as well? And I think we've tried to do that here at Royal Roads. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that most universities in this country lean left, right? Left liberal. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to try to be more inclusive generally, but not at the expense of rolling back things that are absolutely fundamental. Right?
That is a very good point. And taking into account that viewpoint diversity doesn't entail the violation of human rights. And I think the conversation of human rights, should be the one that should be informing what is basically the threshold of that diversity. And I think for some, interesting enough, some universities and it's happening a lot in the US, they are seeing the politicization in the left, they're not seeing the politicization in the right. The right have been able to politicize even workout. Workout now is considered a political kind of statement. About body, male body, and masculinity, and these kind of things, and they're highly politicizing things. But those things are not considered political. But what the left have done is considered highly political. And I think in the case of Canada, the conversation about human rights, I think is a very, very important one, because whatever is going to happen here, and I like you, I welcome viewpoint diversity because it enriches, the possibility for good conversations. But I think that's the balance we have to establish, and I think that's something we have to pay attention to.
No, absolutely, and I think you draw the appropriate distinction. I mean, I think we should be able to broadly agree on what human rights are here and an inclusive definition. I'm not saying that isn't contested, because it is highly contested. And within that context, encourage viewpoint diversity as well. I mean, what you've seen so ironically on the right now is, restrictions on speech, book bannings, all the kind of stuff that they called out the illiberal left for, right? So on the illiberal left, and on the alt-right, we've seen similar kind of behaviors. And I do think that there is something in the middle, this commitment to core values, to human rights, to inclusion, to viewpoint diversity, which is really worth protecting and defending and vigorously arguing for.
So you close the video that we watch with a message to young people. What would you say today to the next generation of LGBTQ plus students, staff, and leaders who are navigating these uncertain times?
Say good luck. No. Just don't give up at all. There might be some reversals, there might be some setbacks, but that's been the history all the way along. None of this is just automatically given to you. It's not granted. You have to fight for it. And, the progress is not necessarily linear, but I think the arc is heading in the right direction generally. So notwithstanding some setbacks, I think we're generally heading in the right direction, while the progress might not be absolutely linear. So stay in the fight, stay committed, stand up, work together. I think that's absolutely critical, and understand the history here as well. we've had a very, I would say in North America, in terms of the kind of gay rights movement, when gay rights were cast as human rights, I think that was a fundamental kind of step forward. So you also have to be quite strategic. You have to know when the moment is to be quite activist and aggressive. And, we think about the ACT UP movement, the early phases of the AIDS epidemic. But then we think of a more sophisticated and nuanced strategy framed in human rights language later on. You think about the setback with the 2004 election in the United States when same-sex marriage was really the ballot question and created the cultural wedge which allowed the right to win that election. But 6 years later, we had a Supreme Court decision. We think about what's happened in trans rights recently, the major setback in the Supreme Court, and you would have to ask yourself strategically, was that the right case to bring forward at that time? So, let's regroup, let's think about, how you move forward in the current context and the current circumstances. So, to the people who are actively involved in these issues, stay involved. The battle's not over. It's not, the war is not won. And we just need to continue. And also remember that while we might be dealing with some challenges here at home, think about the 64 countries I mentioned, or the 12, where homosexuality is punishable by death, and think about how we support those communities as well.
Yeah, I think we are old enough to have witnessed the embracement of rights, and we are from the pre-right kind of era, and so we know what was like before. I think seeing now this kind of an evolution of this backlash, it's difficult to see things that we take now for granted that they came to stay, being dismantled. So we have to go to all forms of mobilization and activation that maybe we are forgotten, because really after so many years of having successful campaigns, successful achievements, to see those dismantled is difficult. What kind of things from the previous era you think we should be recovering and bringing back into the conversation in order to really face this new kind of backlash?
Well, I'll pick up what I said before. I understand the context, understand the moment. There are times when, activism, pretty in-your-face activism is appropriate. There are other times where you have to understand where the crest of the wave is and how you ride it, and don't get ahead of it necessarily. And I think that kind of introspection is really important. I think there's a diversity of tactics available. I think, to your point, Alejandro, if you look back at the civil rights movement, there are many lessons to be learned there. So, know your history, I think, is a kind of fundamental point here. Know your history, and also know who your allies are and who can support you in this. These arguments eventually can be won, and you can get sort of broad public acceptance for them, but you have to figure out kind of where to start and where to focus. There's some immediate things that we need to pay attention to, though. And again, I keep citing U.S. examples here, but I do that because it's almost a precursor to what we are seeing in parts of Canada as well. And notwithstanding the last federal election, I don't think we should become complacent that everything here is just going to now be stable, and that our progress is going to continue to be linear at all. But an example from the States which really struck me, there've been huge rollbacks in so many areas. We think about U.S. aid and the impact that that's had internationally. But the one that really struck me last week was the huge reduction in funding to the U.S. suicide prevention hotline. In particular, $17 million, which had been allocated and is allocated for LGBTQ plus and particular youth. So that money's gone. And the rationale there is, that's all discriminatory and everybody should be treated the same. And yet we know, and you saw those statistics in the video, that suicide rates are astronomically higher in this community, and particularly among parts of the community. And so, I think there are things like that where we need to say, okay, well, if that funding's been removed, then what are we doing? What are we doing individually, and what are we doing as a community? How do we step up? I know, for instance, the Trevor Project has been, and came out with a very clear statement that notwithstanding this, they were going to step into that gap as best they could, and we're asking for support from others. So, certainly learn the lessons from history, figure out the tactics, but also in this current flood the zone moment where we are constantly overwhelmed and exhausted by the change coming, don't lose sight of the damage that has been done. The thing that terrifies me in the last little while is the impact that some of the changes and the cuts to U.S. aid are having on programs in Africa, which is obviously really, important to me, but the HIV prevention programs and huge rollbacks there as well. So there's a lot of work to do, but there's a lot we can do as well.
Thank you. So I have another personal question. In your video, you mentioned it took courage to come out at 38. What kind of courage is needed now? Not just to come out, but to lead openly as you are doing today.
Yeah, it's what kind of courage is needed now? I talked about fair weather friends and rainbow capitalism, right? So it's easy. It's easy for TD Bank or for Target or whatever, to pour money into Pride and all of that, when generally the political environment supports it. It's much harder when that support is no longer there, and in fact, it's not simply that the support's no longer there, but there's actually an active antagonism towards any of those engagements and consequences for participating. So I think the courage that's needed now is the kind of courage that understands that there may be consequences, right? May well be consequences for what you do and how you show up and how you present. And I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently. Do you try and modulate? Do you change what you do? Are you a little more low profile? All of those kinds of things. And it was interesting yesterday because I went up with a student, Ezra, went up to the top of Hatley Castle to fly the Pride flag. We raised it just so we could get a video of it, and it's going back up, I believe, on July 2nd. And it's this massive flag. I think some of you have seen it. I remember the first year we raised it, and the first time the Pride flag had ever been raised here was 2019, and we had a tiny little Pride flag. I thought, okay, now we got a very big Pride flag. And I guess what I'm saying and using that as a metaphor, like it's time to fly the flag, right? And fly the biggest flag you have.
Yeah, I love that. One question, Philip. So what kind of advice you can give to our community, how to prepare for this kind of, new political environment? Even though, once again, you have the calls for neutrality, we never have lived in such a highly politicized historical time. And I wonder because in many ways, transphobia and anti-sexual orientation education was in the platform of certain parties, openly. The only things that were stated clearly. Anti-racism was subtly there. Other things were subtly there, but transphobia and sexual orientation were explicitly named in that. And we now are in a political context in which we can really breathe a little bit, but we cannot be relaxed. But in case something happens, in case some change of the political kind of actors takes place, and we have to really respond, and we have to really be proactive. What kind of advice you can give us as Royal Roads community? We're going to be preparing for this?
It's a great question, Alejandro, and it actually is part of conversation you and I have been having for a couple of years now. And I think about the example of how we've reframed the work that you are leading for the university's human rights and accessibility. And we did that very intentionally in anticipation of some of these challenges coming, because we wanted that work to be framed in a way in which it was framed within a legal framework, right? And the legal foundations. So, notwithstanding what I said about standing up for your values and being out there, you also have to be strategic and you have to be smart. And if you want to continue to do the good work you're doing, you have to figure out a way to do it in whatever context you find yourself in. So there's always this kind of calibration that needs to take place. We, as you point out, we have some breathing room. We have a provincial government which is very supportive of these rights. We have a federal government which is supportive still. So we've got that room, but we must remain vigilant. And if we find ourselves in different circumstances, in different contexts, what kind of adjustments can we make which don't compromise our core values or our principles? But what kind of compromises can we make or adjustments can we make that will preserve and protect what we are trying to do? And if that means taking a step back a little bit or rethinking strategy, then that is absolutely something we should do. We've got a broader kind of, and as president, I've got a broader responsibility to the institution, for its future and its protection and its interests. But that doesn't mean abandoning principles, but it does mean being thoughtful and strategic and kind of intentional about this. What I'm seeing at other universities you've mentioned is this adoption of political neutrality and, quite frankly, the abandonment of departments like yours or units like yours, where it's basically they'll need to figure that out themselves. And they've left them there in some ways as targets and ready to kind of jettison when the going gets tough or when things get harder, instead of having a constructive discussion about, well, how do we move forward and how do we best protect what we've done and what we would like to do. So there's no easy answer to it because, it is context dependent. But, I've good colleagues. There are 3 gay university presidents in Alberta, the president of the University of Alberta, the president of Mount Royal University, the president of MacEwan. And they navigate in a very different environment there. We talk all the time. But none of them have, tried to hide. They are figuring out their way. You can become a bit of a conservative whisperer if you've got that skill, and you find even within a conservative caucus, you can find people who are supporters and who are allies, and you just learn to navigate. You have to.
Okay, so. Stop with this heaviness and let's try to because pride is a celebration. Yes. It's not only about resistance, it's a celebration. So how do you see celebrating pride? How do you see good ways of celebrating and honoring and really having joy and having happiness and bringing this thing back to the conversation? Because you and I tend to go a lot of in the bad side, and we really talk a lot about bad side. But what would be a good way to celebrate and to honor and to bring joy back into the conversation? Pride.
I'm glad you got there because it started by watching that video, which made me feel very emotional. And then as we get into these subjects, they are heavy subjects. And it is a particularly fraught moment. But, get back to think about what Pride is really about. And it, at the core of it is joy. I mean, Pride is meant to be a big party too, right? Mm-hmm. I remember the very first gay Pride I witnessed, and I wasn't out then at all. I had a semester when I was an undergraduate. I had a semester at Princeton University. It was 1983, I think it was, and just took the bus into New York City one weekend. Didn't even know it was Pride. Had no understanding of any of that, but it was Pride parade in New York City in 1983. So prior to the to the real onset of the AIDS epidemic and all of that, and it was just such an extraordinarily joyful and vibrant event, and left a deep impression on me. I sort of had sort of backed against the buildings, wide-eyed, watching this event unfold. I remember an extraordinary moment in Germany in 2007, where I was in Berlin for Pride. And again, it was coincident. I was out at that point, but I was in Berlin for Pride, and it was just coincidental. There was 700,000 people on the streets of Berlin. And it's a wonderful Pride. You can kind of follow the parade for hours. And I remember coming to a point, and the Pride parade would stop at various points, and they stopped at the monument to the murdered Jews of Europe, which is an extraordinarily moving monument in Berlin. And I was standing right next to a float. Amy Winehouse was on that float, and she sang Rehab, right? And I thought, what would Hitler think? Here's a Jewish girl from North London, 700,000 gay people in this parade, and they've reclaimed the city, and they've taken it back, right? And, there was incredible joy in that. Also the memory of what had happened there, too. So, to your question, I would say, this is a time also for joy and for celebration. And for those of you who've participated in Pride parades or activities around, you kind of know that it's a time to have a bit of a party and to celebrate. The thing I find so amusing, and you see it in social media, I'm sure, like, why can't we have straight Pride and all of that kind of thing? And then the one response I saw, there was a picture of the world that said, and every country was blank, it said, number of countries in the world where heterosexuality is illegal, So this is why we need Pride, right? But to your point, it's also a time of great joy and of celebration, of community. And for all of us, whether we're part of this community or not, what it feels like to be in community. And I can say, it's just tremendous feeling of being in community sometimes. And I feel that when I'm there. You just, maybe you can't articulate it, but you feel it. You feel the sense of being in community. And you think about the support and the encouragement that will give to so many people.
I think that even glorifying that joy is a way of resistance as well. I remember when the first Pride parade in Kamloops took place when I was was right before COVID. It was the first time ever they have a Pride parade. I remember the joy. The joy was so intense that I got emotional. Yeah. And I'm not part of the community. But I got very emotional because I saw a joy that I haven't seen in any other celebration. And believe me, I have attended Caribana in Toronto. Nothing really was at the same level. Yeah. So I think that joy is a way of resisting. And it's a way of basically showing, the integrity of the movement and the need of that movement. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, and I'm not unhappy about this end of the era of rainbow capitalism, because some of the Pride parades were getting very, very corporate, right? And there was a critique about that. I know all of that, and I felt very ambivalent about it because on the other hand, it's big buy-in and all of that kind of thing, but they were losing some of their character, right? And the small town prides, in some ways, are the most powerful prides, right? because those are the communities where, people can feel very isolated, and very persecuted in some ways. So to be able to come together and form community, and it doesn't take it doesn't take many people to feel a sense of community. And you're absolutely right about the sort of unbridled joy you see, and I've seen that at small town prides as well. So it is an opportunity to really celebrate as well.
Now I would like to invite Anthony Falls, MA in Higher Education, Administration, and Leadership student, and Senior Manager of Residences at McEwan University, to ask you a question.
Thank you both for this important conversation and for creating space for it. As you mentioned, I oversee an 860-bed student residence at McEwan University in Edmonton. Currently completing my Master's of Arts in Higher Education, Administration, and Leadership at Royal Roads. I'm gay, and I've been thinking a lot about what strength means in leadership, especially as we see growing pushback against inclusion in higher education. What's happening in the United States with diversity, equity, and inclusion offices being dismantled and the LGBTQ+ research funding under threat is very concerning. And I do worry about the potential for that to happen here in Canada. Has your own understanding of strength leadership evolved in response to these social and political shifts over the last years?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Anthony. And just again, congratulations for managing 860 beds at the university. I can only imagine how challenging that must be at some points. Yeah, it definitely has evolved. And it's been really interesting to see, as we've been talking about, how the responses have varied. Some leaders, some of my colleagues have said, now's the time absolutely to stand up, to make the case, to make the argument, not to back down, not to appease. And I think that's really important. Others have sort of drifted to this institutional neutrality position, and yet others have just almost become frozen. And I think you can't do that, right? I think you need to stay authentic. You need to be really clear about what your values are. And we had this earlier discussion about the difference sort of between kind of human rights and political neutrality, or the tension between human rights and viewpoint diversity as well. And so you absolutely have to stay in that space. And if support is being withdrawn at a state level from certain initiatives, what can you do at an institutional level to step into that gap and provide that support? And I cited the example of the National Suicide Prevention Hotline as an example. Now's the time for us to kind of step into important spaces, really important spaces like that. It's interesting. I find myself at a small special purpose university on the very edge of the continent here, with a very supportive community. And I think about my colleagues in other places who are facing much more difficult circumstances. And you can't be judgmental about some of the positions that other people take. I'm thinking right now about the incredibly challenging internal debate that's going on at Harvard University about how far do we go in terms of trying to appease this government. And if you go too far, as we saw at Columbia, it comes back to bite you in a terrible way. So every context is a little different. Every context requires a slightly different response. But, the answer to your question is you really have to know who you are. You have to really understand what your values are and the values of your institution are, and be prepared to stand up for those. Doesn't mean that you don't be strategic in certain respects or more tactical in others, but there's a kind of core which you have to, if you don't know what it is, you have to discover it pretty quickly and use that to inform, how you proceed. And I think there's a lot to be said in solidarity at these moments to sort of reaching out to others. There is a North American forum actually of LGBTQ plus presidents, which meets a couple of times a year. And, you know, there are presidents I've been talking to from very hostile jurisdictions right now. And it's agonizing, but it's helpful for them also to kind of reach out, and you can bounce ideas off each other. You can talk to each other about how things are going, and just lend some support. And often it's just, you know, somebody you can talk to, even if there's no great resolution at hand. It's just somebody you can reach out to and you can talk to.
Anthony?
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate that answer.
So, Philip, some final remarks you want to share with us regarding Pride, regarding your experience as a leader, regarding yourself as a gay man?
No, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and so great to see so many folks here today. And I know there are people listening to this as well. Yeah, it's an interesting moment. I mean, again, I go back to that video, and you know, I recorded that in our back garden in you know, when I was still doing all my own videos, as you can see from the quality of the production before Ali and Lisa and team got involved. But you know, this is it's a time for reflection. It's a time for resistance. But it's also a time, as we've most recently been discussing, for celebration too. So I would encourage you know, all members of the community to celebrate. I mean, we'll be raising the Pride flag again on July 12th, on July 2nd, and we've got, of course, the offer to participate in the parade. I would say it'd be nice to see a bigger Aurora Roads University contingent this year in the parade. It's a fun time, and we'd like to have a bigger contingent than UVic or Camosun or places like that. Just a little friendly rivalry there, and then of course we've got our own events next week. And do go and check out the resources in the library. They always are fantastic around this. So, you know, thank you for the opportunity to have the conversation. And just a huge happy Pride to everybody. And thank you for your support. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Philip, for your honest responses and the opportunity to learn from your lived experience. In a time when many have succumbed to fear, it is inspiring to see you lead with courage and spread the message of hope. So thank you very much for that. It's very inspiring for all people who are in leading positions and also people who are part of protected categories in the province of British Columbia. So please join us on July 3rd for the Pride Social. If you want to participate in the parade, add your name to the list, and so you can be informed about how the parade, we're going to participate in the parade. And check the library resources and the webpage. Thank you very much for coming today. That's very meaningful to us.
Thank you.